everyone. Thanks for coming. It's great to be here. It's a really fun event to see everybody in the application management space, the vendors, and some familiar faces each year. So I'm really glad to be sharing this with you. I've done this event a few times now, and I get worried to come and talk to you guys about packaging when you all know packaging so well. I thought very hard about what can I tell you that might be new. So hopefully you'll get something out of this. For those that don't know me, Bob Kelly, I started AppDeploy. That's how most people know me. That got me some exposure, so I was able to write some books and papers, and then many of you know that AppDeploy became IT Ninja. We changed the name, just like PackagingEvent changed its name to try to appeal to a broader audience on the topic of application management. And then from there, I went on to my role at Dell changed. I worked for myself for a while on AppDeploy, and then Case acquired AppDeploy. They have a systems management appliance, and I went to work for them, and then they were acquired by Dell. So now I work for Dell, and eventually, I moved positions. So I'm still involved with IT Ninja, but it's not my day-to-day anymore. I now manage the product managers on the Case appliances as well as IT Ninja. So you wouldn't want to be that product manager that's in charge of IT Ninja, because I'm very on top of him to make sure that everything's going good there. So I woke up one morning and I was excited at the idea of taking my specialty on packaging and my specialty on Scrum and the management of the process, and kind of tying those two things together, and came up with this idea of applying Scrum, which is usually something used in the development space. A lot of people familiar with Scrum, just by show of hands, Agile development. So pretty good number of people are familiar. Basically, the idea here is to take that philosophy and apply it to packaging. So if you don't, for those that didn't raise your hand, it is typically a development thing, but the idea behind it is to get visibility in your project, so everybody knows what you're working on, when it's going to get done. And so some of the benefits to you would be delivering on schedule, repeatable quality results. I think plays a lot into some of the workflow applications like Sparkle Flow and a bunch of the others on the floor that kind of take you through the process of making sure you do the right thing each time, the same thing each time, and develop that process. But a key thing about applying this methodology to packaging is to be able to give realistic expectations. So if you have 50 applications you're working on, your boss wants to know, when's this one going to be done, when's that one going to be done, and this process will kind of help you be able to give that answer with some confidence. So for Scrum, and Scrum is one of a handful of different Agile methodologies or frameworks that you can follow, and they have certain roles attached to them. And the product owner is the individual that's responsible for the priorities. Here are the things that we're going to do next. On a development project, it would be talking to customers and finding out features, and then prioritizing those features so the most valuable things are happening next. In the packaging world, that would be, what applications need to be done, and collecting the information and assessing the priority of which one should be done first, which one should be done next. The Scrum Master is more of a technical role. That would be the development lead on a development project, or the lead packager on a packaging project. And we'll talk about that role a little bit more. The team is also an important role, and this is everybody, the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the packagers, the people working on the team, all toward a common goal of meeting the projected schedule and doing a good job. And then stakeholders, I point out because in a lot of cases, there's exposure that you want to bring in from the outside, and identifying those people and knowing who cares, who wants the insight. Sometimes it's a certain department lead wants to know when are the applications for my guys going to be up. That would be somebody you can invite in to enjoy the visibility that comes with this process. One of the most fundamental things about Scrum is the idea of a user story. So for this template is kind of used for everything that you propose to do. So as a user, I want to do something so that I can, and why. So from a development standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. For packaging, it still applies pretty well. So as who, now you're saying, instead of just saying an application name, you're saying who it's for, then specifically the application, and then why. Why is this application important? Why is it being done? So that these benefits here can be enjoyed. So they're easy to write. It's a very simple format to follow. Doesn't take a lot of time, but it does provide a lot of clarity to people from the outside. So somebody that doesn't know all of the packages on the list might see application names that don't make sense to them, that don't mean anything to them, that are a higher priority than theirs. So instead of having to explain why that's the case, they could read a user story and better understand who it's for and why it's being done. And the user story also promotes the idea of providing just enough information. So the idea is not to say you're going to deploy this application in this way, but to just give enough information to meet the actual requirement of the delivery. And then there's a bunch of other benefits that don't apply to packaging that I won't go into. So for example, create a package for Photoshop might be something that's on your to-do list today. For this process, we're not saying who it's for, what version, why it's needed. So to take it a step further, I could say as a designer, now I know who we're talking about, I want to have Photoshop installed, but we're not saying why Photoshop. So maybe there's another tool already available that would suffice. Maybe the user thinks, I need Photoshop, but they already have an application, or you already have an application that you've already packaged and are ready to deploy, or have a license for it, et cetera. So a little validation of why things are needed. So a good, well-written user story here might be, as a designer, I want Photoshop 11, and it's so I can work with company-approved formats. In that case, okay, who it's for, what version, and also what the reason is for it. And that's something that you can more effectively prioritize against other applications versus just the application name. Along with the user story, you'll often have acceptance criteria. This is your way to expand beyond the user story of just saying Photoshop 11. Now we can say some specific requirements that apply to this application. So make sure that it's only installed when a user's logged in or not logged in, if that's a requirement for this particular package. Probably you don't want to automatically restart the computer. These types of things can be used to communicate more specifics about the need of the deployment. And then there's some things that apply, like don't restart the computer, that might apply to every single user story or every single package that you're doing. So for this, there's a thing in Scrum called the definition of done, where the things that apply to every user story are documented. So you don't have to say every single time these same things need to be done. So for packaging, it might be that it must be installed silently, must not negatively impact other applications, running with standard user permissions, and then at what stage is it done, I think is something that I thought about, because at the end of this, there's a release, and the release in development would be a new version of the application goes out to the market and everybody can can enjoy what you've built. But in the packaging world, that could be a very different thing depending on how your organization is set up. So if there's a separate team doing packaging and deployment, then you might be done when that package has been tested and QA'd and to be deployable. That could be done for you. But if your team also does the deployment, then done could include the deployment. And if it does include the deployment, you'd want to document how complete a deployment does that need to be. 90%, 100%. 100% deployment in a large environment can be really hard to attain, and then you never get to done. And it's very hard to meet schedule. So a realistic goal of what is considered done, because that gets important when we look at estimating packages. So there's the idea of estimates. We use a numeric value called a story point to say how difficult something is. And it's not a measurement of time, it's an arbitrary number. And the idea is to start with something that's known. Say iTunes, is a relatively moderate package, not too hard, not too easy. So if everyone knows what that is, then from there you could say, if we give that a number like 12, or any number, it could be, an application that's twice as hard would be twice as many points. Something that's much easier would be less points. And so it's a relative score that will be different in every organization. There's no right number. But the idea is to be able to communicate this is, very easy through very hard, and have some idea of how many of those easy and hard ones you can get done. So to help with that, this is my only IT Ninja pitch. There's in the software library on IT Ninja, we have crowdsourced information about how difficult the package is, and this could help you to assess how relatively easy or hard it is to give it your story point value without having to do a lot of research. You could look at what your peers and the people in this room have said before you. We've got what type of setup it is, and so every time somebody says this is an MSI, this is an executable, some applications are delivered more than one way, but what we present here is the most commonly received answer. So if most people say it's an MSI, then you'll be able to look here and see it's an MSI or a legacy setup with command line support, or standard setup without command line support that you might have to repackage. That type of information should be available just by looking at that. And then the most commonly reported deployment method, after we ask you what type of setup is it, we also say, how did you deploy it? Because maybe it's a legacy setup with command line support, but everybody's repackaging it because that command line support isn't so good. Just getting to know how everybody else is doing it can be pretty valuable. And then there's a 1 to 5 difficulty rating that we have, which is very, very arbitrary, because some people very comfortable with packaging might say every package is easy, and somebody that doesn't know very much could think a relatively easy package is quite hard. So you got to take that with kind of a caveat, but I think these other two things will probably let you know how difficult you think it's going to be, and then you can see the tips. Of course, there's people giving command line tips or tips on how they went about repackaging it or configuring it, and all that type of information should give you pretty good insight as to how difficult it is. And hopefully that will help you do a better estimation of that package up front. Another key thing that's important to identify is business value. For the development world, if you're building an application, you prioritize those things that provide the most business value at the top of your list, so they get done first. And how you determine what the business value is another thing that's totally up to you. Some people do a scale of 1 to 10. Some people say 1 to 50, 1 to 1,000. The number could be anything, but there should be some science behind that number so that it's a repeatable thing. So it might be for an application deployment, how many users are there for it? If it's for everyone in your organization, maybe that piece of data gets your max score. So if that's, say, for example, there was a 1 to 5 for each of these, it's going to everybody, I'd give it 5 for how many people are going to be using it. Is it job critical? If it's a reader application and people need that a lot, and that's very important, then you give that a high score. If the deployment's security related, if you don't deploy it, then bad things could happen. That's probably going to make it a higher priority for you as well. Is the target user an executive? Unfortunately, in the real world, we have to treat those things differently. Those guys need to get their things faster, so that could affect your score here. And then is it related to a support issue? So if users are having problems because of a current package that's out there and you need to deploy this to save that problem, then how many support instances that causing would be another thing that I think would probably determine your business value. So the range and number that you give for each application is going to be totally up to you, and what you decide to judge as the criteria for business value is totally up to you. But the idea of looking at all your packages and kind of using a methodology to say which ones really come out on top, I think is important, because unlike management tells you they're all important, they're not all equally important. Something has to come first, and this can help you kind of sort that. So this is an example of a backlog. A backlog is your to-do list, all the things that you're going to be working on. So you can see I've got it sorted by business value. Typically, that's how you would want to do it. But you could have something with a relatively low business value that everyone's beaten you up about, and that moves it up the list. So it's a guide for where it belongs on the list. But the order, and I have a priority number here, but really it's just the order of that list that dictates what's most important. Whatever's on top is most important, and whatever's on the bottom is least important. And then for story points, that was the difficulty rating that we came up with to say how much effort it would be to do each of these applications. So the two of those things becomes insightful to determine how soon you're going to be able to get things done, how much you'll be able to bite off at once. So there's a concept of sprints. This is the time-limited period where you're actually doing the work. And this can be any length of time you need it to be. Typically a week or two. For packaging, I would say no more than 2 weeks. The idea behind this being that once you say, okay, these are the things we're going to do in this sprint, in this 2-week period, then you don't want to have to change that. That's what the team's committed to doing. That's what you want to get done. And so you don't want to have some new high priority come in and then you have to throw the process out the window and start changing things. So the idea is you can be more agile, you can be more reactive, and if halfway through your sprint a new priority comes up, it can probably wait a week, or hopefully it can wait a week, and then you don't have to interrupt things. You can just adjust your plan for the next sprint to get this in. So we measure what you're going to be able to get done in story points. So we refer to that as capacity, the capacity of the team. It's going to depend, how many people are on the team, how good a job, the team can do to get packages done. So we just start adding up the capacity on the right here. So if we were going to do the first 2, that's 28 points. If we're going to do the first 3, that's 40 points. And you basically figure out how much your team can get done in a sprint. So if that's a 2-week period or a 1-week period, and you are saying that you want to get all these things done, that's how we work it out. So anything above the line, and if everything's sorted properly, not necessarily by business value, like I said, there could be reasons that you don't go by business value, but to have everything sorted, you can basically just move that line and say, okay, if we can get this much done, that much done, then these are the packages we're going to do in this sprint. And the velocity is the measurement of how you do. So if you set out to do say, in your first sprint, you don't know what you can do because you've never done this before. So you'll assign numbers, and you'll say, we can probably get 2 done, 3 done. You'll come up with a number as a guess, and it won't be right, and that's okay. That's part of the process, is for it to always be changing. So we overestimated. We said, we can do 60 points in our 2-week sprint. And then when we finished, that 2-week period ended, we only got done 40 points worth of stuff. Then what we would say is, our next sprint, we're only going to put 40 points worth of work into that sprint. And then you finish and you find out you got 45 points worth of work done. Then the next sprint, you say, okay, we're going to do 45 points, and you just adjust that each time. So what you can get done is going to constantly be changing. And that's how it's supposed to work. So, if we take a bigger backlog here and say that we're going to do a 50-point capacity, then we can only get these done. So if it's 2-week period, then, in 4, which would be 8 weeks out, I could tell people we should snag it to you in 8 weeks because of our current priorities and the current level of work and our current knowledge of how much we can get done in these sprint periods. This is where we are. So this really gives some good visibility to the organization to say, okay, here's all the stuff, here's its priority, and here's when we think it's going to get done. But then, a new priority pops up. So there's a security update related to Adobe, and that has to go to the top of the pile. Pushes everything else down. So now, here it was before. So, Picasso was happening in Sprint 6, and now it's going to happen in Sprint 7. So that application just took a 2-week bump because of the Adobe update that we have to do. And so being able to show what the impact of something from priority changes is going to be on the organization is another really nice way for you to communicate to everybody that their priorities are changing and that affects things. But being transparent, it's not, well, I thought it was going to be 2 weeks, where is it? You can say, this is exactly what happened, and you can share this along the way. So I was hoping by this time I wouldn't look out and see anybody that looks like the guy in this picture, and I don't, so that's good news. One of the key things about Scrum that I think a lot of people like is the idea of not disrupting the team. So if you say we're going to get this done in 2 weeks, it's important that you don't give them some other project halfway through or another priority that isn't agreed to work that was dictated as part of the sprint. So the Scrum Master, the tech lead, that's his main role, is to protect the team from distractions. So if there's constantly things coming in, requests coming in, he kind of does the block and tackle and stops people from having to stop and answer people's questions and deal with things. But there are going to be things that do get, they're just legitimate interruptions that are going to slow you down. But that's okay. It gets absorbed. So that what we can get done in a sprint based on points, one of the big benefits of not recording difficulty in hours or time is that it's easier to adjust this arbitrary number of points. So someone goes on vacation, you lose half your team. It just affects the capacity of what you'll get done in that sprint. But you know it and you can adjust for it. But when it comes to like daily meetings or like all hands things, problems that necessarily interrupt the team on a regular basis, you don't have to build those in. So you don't have to say, well, it's an 8-hour work day, but there's always 2 hours of meetings every day. So we'll call it a 6-hour work day. Then you just start getting too scientific with it. And this is all about estimating and adjusting based on results. So the idea of letting that adjustment just absorb these other interruptions is really beneficial. So there's a few meetings kind of attached to the process. One's the Scrum meeting. It's supposed to be no longer 15 minutes in length, and it's a daily meeting. Everybody likes the idea of a meeting that's not more than 15 minutes. And I've been to them that are 3 or 4 minutes, because it's an around the room, what did you do yesterday? What did you do today? And do you have any impediments? Is there anything stopping you from doing what you need to do next? And the idea there is that's the most important information. And that's all you're discussing, and you're getting out of the way and done. And then offline, if there's a problem that needs to be corrected and so forth, that can happen. But without everybody else having to sit around in a meeting that goes on for an hour while they work out a problem. So again, just working towards minimal interruption on the team as they keep their heads down on the work of the sprint. Another meeting in the process is the estimation meeting. This is where the packagers will sit down and assign story points to each of the applications. So they'll do the research and find out how big a job they think it's going to be. The estimation's done based on what the product owner has dictated as the priority. So that backlog, that list of applications, the things on the top are the most important ones. The things on the top are the ones that are going to get done next, and those are the ones that need to have estimations assigned. In the estimation, the product owner doesn't participate, and the other thing is the product owner, who's not a packager, can't say, wait a minute, that's not a 20-point package, that's a 5-point package. They can't say that. So it lets the packagers say how difficult something's going to be, how much work it's going to be, how relatively more difficult it is than another thing. And that kind of rule that stops people from debating how it should be is pretty important. But coming to that number can be a challenge. If you have a very small team, or even a large team, a lot of times there'll be 1 or 2 dominant voices that say, that's this number, and everyone just nods their heads. And then it goes like that. And that can work, but it's not as valuable as having everyone participate. So there's a thing called planning poker and there's an online version of it at this website, where you can sit down and say, here's the package, here's the acceptance criteria, and here's what we found out about it on IT Ninja. Everybody pick how many points you think it is. So everyone will say, okay, I think it's 5 points, I think it's 8 points, I think it's 30 points. But the idea is everybody on the team comes up with their number and shows them at the same time. So that way you don't get somebody who says, it's a 30, and everyone just says, oh, okay, it's a 30. By everyone showing it at once, you're getting full participation, and you're also driving important conversations. So if everybody on the team says it's 30 points and one person says it's 5 points, then that says there's a misunderstanding somewhere. We need to have a conversation and figure out, why do you think it's so low, or why do you think it's so high? And that conversation should, drive what you need to know in order to have estimated it properly. And it is just an estimate, so you can get tied up in trying to get them just right, because obviously you do better when you estimate better, so you can get into a mode where you spend too much time estimating and working on it too hard. It is an estimate, not a fixed number. Another meeting is the sprint review meeting. And this will happen before the sprint, and it's basically just going down the list. Here's what we're going to do in this sprint. These are the packages we're going to get it done. Hopefully, during the estimation process, if there was information missing, if you don't have the license number, you don't have the software, the actual installation media, then hopefully those types of things get identified during the estimation process. And what happens there is, if you don't have what you need, you can't estimate it, it doesn't get a number. And then it's on the product owner to say, oh, crap, I need this thing done, it's a big priority, but it's not getting estimated because of missing information. That drives, fulfilling those answers. Another very good thing to have, of course, would be a subject matter expert on the application to validate if, what success is. A lot of us, I know you get the installation media, you do the install, it's very straightforward. Okay, this one's done. But if you don't have somebody that knows the application sit down and try to use it, you really don't know for sure if it's a success. So identifying somebody might be another criteria that you have for every application to say, before we're going to call this done, we need to have somebody sit down and look at it. So identifying that person could be part of the criteria you have for accepting a package into the sprint. Another meeting, I said no meetings, but there are a lot of meetings. As little meetings, but they try to happen outside the sprint. So the real key is that during sprint time, those Scrum meetings are the only ones that are happening, and they're the 15-minute quick, what we're working on type meetings. But a sprint retrospective, I think, is really important, and it's one of the reasons I like Scrum so much, is it's a framework, and it's here's what we recommend, but you can adapt it as you go as a team. So in the sprint retrospective meeting, everyone will say what they thought went well and what they thought didn't go well. And hopefully you get some positive comments in there, but it's also the time for people to complain. This didn't work well for us. And so what you can do then with that feedback is change the process. Say, okay, well, from now on, we're always going to have a subject matter expert validate the package because we thought it was good and it wasn't. And the whole team says, yes, that's going to be a criteria of ours from now on, and that changes the process. Some people, they don't meet every day for a Scrum meeting because they don't feel it's necessary, so they meet a couple times a week. Maybe they want to talk about more in the Scrum meeting than, just what I did, what I'm doing, and if there's a block. Or maybe they want to talk about more, and that meeting goes beyond 15 minutes, and the whole team says, okay, let's make this a 30-minute meeting, do it twice a week, and include these other topics. That kind of starts breaking Scrum, but because it's just a framework and it's a starting point, if the whole team agrees to a change, then the idea is to adopt that change, and then in the next sprint's retrospective meeting, talk about, did it go well or not? Should we try it again? Should we throw that out? But you can evolve it so that it fits best for your team and you're doing what makes the most sense for your team. And then I want to talk about releases from a packaging perspective. Like I said, it really depends on your organization. If you're doing the deployment, how many people do the packaging and the deployment, and they would consider the deployment of the application done? About half. How many people would say just getting the application done and ready to go would be your version of done? So, okay. So a pretty good mix. It really depends on your organization but the number that you put on it would still be the same. So if you said that iTunes was a 12-story point package, then that doesn't mean, if we're going to do the deployment too, then we need to make that a bigger number, because it's just a relative comparison to another package. So maybe you get a whole lot less done. You have a much smaller capacity for what you can get done because you have to do so much. But the idea that everything's kind of abstracted that way lets you adjust what needs to be done. It doesn't have to affect your numbers. If that makes sense. In development, usually there's a sprint, and then a sprint, and then a sprint, and then at some point a release, and a new version comes out. We use Agile development on IT Ninja, and their sprint is a 3-week sprint, and then there's a week of QA that isn't considered part of the sprint, which is breaking Scrum, because that was the methodology the team evolved it into. But every month there's another release on IT Ninja, so it's a rapid release pretty much every month. But normally QA would be part of the process. You wouldn't say that this feature or this package is done until it had also been QA'd. But depending on your team, if you have a separate QA department and resources are limited like they are in the case of IT Ninja, then that might force a change, which is okay in Scrum. It's a framework that you can bend to your own needs. So in summary, I would recommend starting with Scrum as prescribed and then adopting it from there versus adjusting it to your needs right away, just to try to force yourself to do it as documented. It is something that is widely adopted, very successful in a lot of places. So having those rules as a starting point, I think, is pretty valuable to getting going. But then, if this doesn't make sense to you and you can't adopt this, hopefully there's a thing or two that does make sense that you can kind of take and apply to your own process. And I'm way ahead of schedule, so I hope there's some questions. We could talk about anything, the process, Scrum stuff, IT Ninja, meaning of life. I don't know the answer. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Well, when using Scrum, how big is your assumption that you have a relatively constant workload, and how do you deal with variations in that? Say, this week I have 2 packages to make, next week I get 10 requests.
That's a good question. So the question was, how do you deal with Scrum and packaging when you have a very variable workload? There might be 2 packages one week, 8 packages the next week. This still applies. So you would say, if you only had, go back to my backlog picture. If you only had so many story points for your sprint, but you didn't have enough to fill it, then you just finish early. And that's another thing to watch out for. Is you could say, we're going to get 40 points worth of stuff done, and then you finish in half the time. So there could be a desire then to say, okay, well, let's just do more work. Let's give me more to do. The right way to handle it from a Scrum perspective is to end the sprint early. So if you only had 1 package, or if you finished early, then you just end the sprint early and say we're done, versus waiting for more or adding more to fill the load. And then as more packages come in, you'd build up your backlog accordingly. So there could be times when, shorter or longer sprints, or are they always fixed in length? They should be fixed in length. So again, if that is something that doesn't make sense for your organization, then you as a team can decide to adjust it. But ideally, the idea, one of the key things is there's a commitment by the team. So everyone's saying, hey, as a team, we think we can get these 3 packages done in a week. And then it's on the team, to fulfill that. They want to do what they said they would do. And so there's an ownership and a driver to say, okay, we're going to get this done. Versus if you kind of throw that out and say, well, we're just going to add more to it, or, yeah, I was way off, but so what? The team has to believe in their estimates and be trying for this to be successful. So, good question. Yes?
I think for packages, I've never done this before, they're going to want some calibration points for how to set the point. So is there anything that you think, is any package a 1? What are some calibration points for high and low that you may give them to start?
Yeah, that's a good question, too. Where to start from an estimation standpoint. There's something called the Fibonacci sequence of numbers that gets used a lot for packaging. It's like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and it goes up. And the idea there is that you don't have any numbers too close together. Generally speaking, from a development standpoint, if the estimation was really high, that would mean this is too difficult, and we need to find a way to break it up and make it smaller. The smaller the estimate, the more accurate it usually is. But from a packaging perspective, just like anything else, it is just an arbitrary thing. So, if an application that everybody on your team understands is really the measure. So if everybody thinks that WinZip is easy and that Office is harder, then you'd say, well, how much harder do we think it is? Twice as hard, 3 times as hard? And then that's how you get your numbers. So the number itself doesn't matter as much as its relative change from easy to hard. And the key thing there is starting with something that everybody understands. Everyone says this package is an easy one or this is a medium one. Then you just compare everything to it. Thanks. Yes?
Notice very low business value and high story points. How do you avoid it never getting done? Because something comes up as a higher business value.
That's a good question too. So sometimes we have, the question was, some of these in my example have very high story point, so they're very difficult, but they, their business value doesn't correspond. So you could have, Lotus Notes could be a high priority but very difficult, and with changing priorities, how do you measure that? And the idea is to just stick to the business value as the model. So it could be that you have one really difficult package that's a big priority, then that means that might be the only one you get done, or maybe just that one and 1 or 2 others, but a lot less is going to get done in this sprint because we have a difficult package that has to get done. But generally speaking, the ordering of the backlog is based on business value. But there could be needs too. There could be that you have one packager that has a specialty, and every MSI package, for example, he's your MSI guru, and he knows transform files like nobody else, so he gets all the Windows installer packages. If that were the case on your team, then you'd kind of have to balance your backlog to make sure that he didn't end up with all the packages or no packages. So there are definitely other things that can go into how you would order your backlog. Yes?
Are there any frequent mistakes that people make when you're trying to implement Scrum for packaging?
Are there any frequent mistakes I've seen people trying to implement Scrum for packaging? No, because I've never seen it done. This was a concept I had just because I love packaging and I love Scrum, and I think that they apply well. So I woke up one day with that idea in my head, and I was very excited, and I wrote a blog post on IT Ninja. And then when I had the opportunity to come here, I said, well, this would be a good place to test it out. So I would love to hear, if anyone adopts this or parts of this, how things go, so that we can learn from it and maybe develop it into a more commonly used practice. Yeah, that would be great. Yes?
If QA is part of the sprint, how would you deal with business users that need to validate the package and you need to wait for them?
How would you deal with, if you have part of your definition of done is it needs to be approved by an expert on the tool and they're not available, how is that going to affect you? And it would affect you poorly. So I would recommend getting a commitment from that person and saying, hey, this is our schedule, this is the week that we're probably going to need you. And again, that's going to change if a security update comes out. If a new Heartbleed happens and you have 30 new packages that have to go out right away, that's going to really mess up your schedule. But the idea that you have a schedule and you can tell them ahead of time, hey, we've identified you for this application, we expect to need you, this week or that week, then hopefully you can mitigate that. But getting commitment is important, and maybe a backup as well in case they're, maybe they're sick and then you can't get it done. Yeah. Yes.
We are using Scrum in our current project. To deal with that problem, what we did first is to package everything. Now we're going to Q&A everything.
Okay. All right.
That you get a planning when your test guy is coming in, and you can set your sprint up like that.
Okay. So in his process, the validation happens outside the sprint, basically. So that allows them to stay on target. But then that means that deployment's not part of your sprint then. So it's just the packaging piece. Otherwise, it would never get done.
You get a lot of rework, of course.
Yeah.
Deployment is also.
Okay. Yeah. So if the feedback from the user was negative and you needed to make a change, then you'd have to basically put that change into your backlog again before it were released, and it would have to get prioritized accordingly. Probably top priority if it's something you did, and now it's not making it for some reason. It probably is going to end up back near the top of your backlog and get done in the next sprint. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll be around the floor. I don't have a booth, but I'll be walking around. I look forward to meeting and talking to a lot of you. Thanks.